Our chat with Edmonton radio legend Len Thuesen, who, by the way, gave me my first job in radio. I'm John Beaudin from Rock History Canada. A couple of years ago, I told Len I wanted to do this series on radio broadcasters. I wasn't going to talk to a lot of people, just a handful that I really respected. Some I didn't really know when I contacted them. But I told Len, I'm not doing this unless I talk to you first. Even though the AM-powerhouse 630 CHED was not his first gig, it certainly made him a star, which led to him getting his first program director's gig at CKRA in 1979, which became 96 K-lite, and that's how we met in the early 80s. I think it was 83 or 84 when he first hired me. I'd be remiss if I didn't say Len, by far, was the hardest program director I ever had to work with. I remember when he hired me, he called me up, I think it was May, and he said, "What are you doing for the summer?" And I'd been bugging him. He was on the air doing his afternoon drive show. And he told me, he says, "You know what? You're starting in major market. It's going to be hard for you. I'm not cutting corners for you." And he didn't. And as I mentioned, he taught me more than any other program director in my 35-year history. My conversation with the great Len Thuesen. I want to start first with, you grew up in Edmonton, correct?
Yeah, that's true.
So I remember someone called me once when I was at CKXM and said, "Oh, I grew up with Len. He was such a great guy. We always knew he was going to do well." And I remember thinking at the time, I hope someone says that about me someday. And I remember I stopped and I went, I think anyone would want that. When you have a kid, I don't know who he was, some guy who grew up near you, and he had said that we always knew he always had a lot of things going on in his head. So what kind of a kid were you?
I was always tearing apart electronics, trying to figure out how it worked, and then of course could never get them back together again like they were, right? I was always doing stuff. I built a lot of gas model airplanes. I used to fly them when I was a kid, 10 or 11, whatever, right? And I made bombs too.
not PC anymore, but back then a lot of kids do the rockets and all that stuff because the mind never stops like that. Your neighbor had told me, right?
That's right.
What about music? Long before radio, but when did the bug for music happen? I know you're a big Beatles fan. What was that first album for you?
When I look back, my mom and dad listened to CFCW, so I heard Patsy Cline, and I listened to CJCA because they were boss radio when I was about 11. Beatlemania, the British invasion hadn't hit yet. But one day, I turned on CHED, and they had flipped over to pop music from easy listening. And I was with a friend, and we heard "I Want to Hold Your Hand," and we both went, "What the hell is that?" Right? Because it was basic rock and roll. And then when Twist and Shout, when they were screaming and yelling, and I had a neighbor next door who had friends in England. They used to send over albums from England, and one of them was this album.
Oh my
God! On a German label.
Is that the actual album that you had back then?
It's on a German label. It wasn't in Canada yet. It was on Odeon. And once I heard this, that was it. It was over. And then, of course, the Rolling Stones, Kinks, Yardbirds, Blue Cheer. I mean, it just went on and on.
Yeah, that was amazing. What was was that the first album? What was that first album for you? Was that it?
That was it. That turned me on to music. I got really excited.
And how old were you? Do you remember?
11, 12.
See, you got the bug earlier. When I talk to people, even like every artist that I talk to, I'm always curious on what that age is. And it changes. It seems younger. I mean, they're young now and they're buying their MP3s, but there's not that depth, and I hate to sound like the old guy going, you young bastards. But I find there's a real difference in absorbing music from kids today who might buy an album, or don't buy the album, they'll download the single.
Yeah.
Back then, were you the guy that absorbed the whole album when you bought something?
Totally. At first, it was singles. You played singles. But once the album genre started happening, like Beatlemania or the Rolling Stones, High Tides in Green Grass, you listened to the whole album. And that's what you wanted because hey, there's more music in here, and it's not just filler anymore. It's actually really good.
When did that transfer, that love for music, how many years was it before you were buying music and you're knee deep in it, that you got the bug for what changed? How did you go to the next step to want, not to get into radio, but to want to get into radio?
So I decided I was going to get into radio in about 1967, and I would have been in grade 10.
That's really young, but what was it? Like what moment? I remember my moment, but what was your moment? Was it a number of things?
Yeah, it was what it was I loved music like crazy. I loved to read about groups, and I listened to Bob McCord. He was on evenings on CHED doing really crazy stuff. I had a 2 or 6 transistor radio under my pillow, and I'd listen, and I'd go, oh, what does that room look like inside he's in? What's going on? It's so awesome. It just, I from then on in, I kind of knew I got to do this. It's just, is this really a job? Wow.
That first big break for you was really CHED, but you'd mentioned another station before. Were you someplace shortly before then?
Yeah, I was there for 11 months before I got to CHED. I called a guy up named Mel Stevenson in Fort St. John, and they had CKRA Radio, and it was a Monday, and I had sent some demo tapes that I'd made through Columbia School of Broadcasting. And all he said was, it sounds like you have a pretty good set of pipes. Can you be here Thursday? And I had just really graduated out of high school. It was June, right? And I said, oh, sure, not knowing what I was getting into. And I was on the plane, and I had hair down to here, blue glasses. And when I got off the plane, a couple of ranchers picked me up. I flew Ward Air, which is a great airline. But they left me, it's in Bob Layton's book, they left me in the car downstairs, and when they went upstairs, Mel said, well, where's the new kid? And they said, Mel, he's one of those. I don't think you want him. He's a hippie. Right? His backsack is probably full of marijuana, Mel.
And I went to school with Mel at CHIT, and Mel was a no-nonsense, traditional type of guy.
Yeah, he was. He taught me how to learn quickly how to be a basic radio broadcaster. He'd give you shit, yeah, right? But you learn from him. I thought he was a great teacher.
I thought that one of the things that I learned from you was the fact that you taught me how to get in and out quickly, and you say you want to say a lot without saying a lot. And I wonder if Mel was, because Mel kind of, I never made that connection. Now I remember why I contacted you, because it was through Mel, and Mel was, now I get it. Up until now, I'd forgotten. You know how sometimes there's only so much room in here? But yeah. You impressed upon that. Was Mel the guy who taught you that? You got to say a lot, but you got to get out.
Him, very true, but also when I got to CHED, because it was a top 40 format, it was keep the music. They used to say, hey, the music is the star. You just happen to present it. So if you talked a lot, you would get in trouble, right? So you learned how to say a lot in a short amount of time and get back to the hits.
What was it like for you when you worked with Mel during that 11-month era? Do you remember that first night?
I remember that first morning. I arrived at about 11 o'clock from the airport in Fort St. John. They put me in the news booth 15 minutes after I was there. I said, what? Mel says, well, you want to be a broadcaster, don't you? He said, well, here. He rips it off the machine, says, read the news. It's on in 5.
That's so Mel.
I came out of there, seriously, John, soaked. Yeah.
He was a character. I remember when he died, his daughter contacted me because I had a long article about, starting with you but starting with him. And at one point I said, Mel came up to me one day and he says, and I probably deserved it, I look at all the criticism I had back then. I'm going, hard times makes good people.
Yeah.
I'm from that. And Mel came up to me and he said, you'll get a kick out of this. He said, you're not the brightest bulb, are you? And later when I left the school, I said, Mel, why'd you say that? That's I was rude. He says you needed to hear that.
That's okay. Yeah.
You know, he saw something in me, the cockiness that I had back then, and I remember going, Mel, you son of a you smart bastard. Good for you.
Yeah, I love him. He was a very big influence on me.
Yeah.
Huge.
Fast forward to CHED, and I came to Edmonton in '79, and when I talked radio, everyone mentioned to me. Everyone talked about CHED. They're going, these are the big guy, and that was it was still big then.
Yeah.
When was it for you? When did you go to CHED?
I got there in just about, probably, 71. 70 or 71 in June.
Yeah.
I did all nights for 3 days, and Keith James called me and said, come to my house in Grandview. And he had a room with a bookcase in the basement that opened, and there was a studio behind the wall, and then there was a machine that taped every break I did that night through the phone lines. As soon as I pushed my mic button, the tape would start. Then he sat down and said, you are shitty, right? And it started there, but I learned very quickly because I didn't want to be anywhere else.
You know, I never learned, and this has something to do with you, I've never learned anything unless a boss, and I became a program director here, and I remembered that, and that's what made me, at least, I wasn't on the level you were, but I remember going, don't try to be their friends. It's good if you are, but you don't have to. It's like a parent, but don't lie to them.
Correct.
And he did that to you.
Yeah, totally.
Even though you were sweating bricks at the time.
Oh, dang, I was.
Yeah.
From there, the great thing that happened was CHED had already realized there was no FM per se, and album rock needed to be played because that's what the kids wanted. They wanted to hear album cuts.
Yeah.
And so they presented me with this idea to do 9 to midnight specials. And of course I'm going, yeah, okay, I don't have to play Donny Osmond. I get to play all the albums, right?
Len, what year would that have been when they approached you with that?
71.
Oh, it was 71. Okay.
Yeah.
Like you were a kid in a candy store.
Pretty much. But then I thought I was going to do all these groups that I was doing, and Keith James says, the first show we're going to do is Ray Charles for 3 hours. And I went, what? Ray Charles? He says, you got to learn the roots before you get to where you are today. And I learned about all the 50s music from him. He gave me books, albums, and then we progressed to Neil Diamond. And then we progressed to progressive rock by 75 because the show had built up, a good audience.
Yeah, but that Neil Diamond, Hot August Night would have been 73 or something like that. Were you around? Were you presenting, for instance? Because that was he had been big obviously before that. I'm a big Neil Diamond fan, but
yeah, he was huge.
Do you remember what albums, like after the Ray Charles, were there spots? Because I love hearing about, the moments. But were there spots where you were putting something down back then and going, wow, this is important stuff?
Yeah, it was like Hot August Night.
Yeah.
Huge album. And what I realized, John, and what I was being taught was what I think is important musically maybe isn't as broad as what this is. If you did Neil Diamond, your ratings would be huge. Everybody would listen from 14 to 40.
Yeah.
If you did Led Zeppelin, you're squeezing the audience tighter.
Yeah.
So it was good programming.
Well, I think with that kind of stuff, there's that thing that happens, and when I went to CKXM after, there's that thing that happens where I remember going, this is fun. I can kind of do whatever I want. George Kelso was a good guy, but no one was telling me, oh, by the way, that break was shit. And I'm going, so when I was at CKXM, we were able to play a lot of different things, but I remember the term, I don't think I got it from you, I got it from somebody that said, you're kind of like horse shit all over the road.
Yeah.
Because, there is something to be said about what you just said of going, okay, when I play this, I'm here, and it's appealing to this, within reason. We're never 100% sure, but when I play this, I'm over here. Being aware of the audience and who's out there. Was there ever a moment where you were in radio and you went, Joe Lunchbucket, Evelyn, everybody's listening, this is who's listening. Did you have an image of who was listening to you through the years?
Oh, totally. And the reason we had that was we had to go out every other day to events.
Right.
to see who we're talking to get feedback. And that was really how you understood the audience. Plus, Jerry Forbes and Keith James, McCord, we had meetings all the time about who these people are that we're trying to attract. And it's a broad image. You remember we had day parting. In West Montgomery's show, you wouldn't be hearing a whole lot of love.
Yeah.
But by 4 o'clock in the afternoon, you would be.
Foreground, because that was not something AM ever did, right? Foreground?
Oh, no, that was hell.
I want to know your perspective. So you come from CHED and you're going and you're running the ship at K-lite, because I'm trying to get in your head. All of a sudden, at what point did you have to know about Foreground?
I knew immediately that this was going to be a really difficult thing to do with the station, because I always was taught the music is the star, not all this talk, John. 60 minutes on the beluga whale, 30-second mosaics, hours of foreground, talk, and they've got a stopwatch, and well, it wasn't 60 seconds, that didn't count. It became a real white elephant. I hated it a lot. I was in Ottawa 3 times.
Were you?
in trouble with the CRTC. And I would tell them, no, you're wrong. And of course, Hal would go, Leonard, you can't tell them they're wrong. Yeah. But they tell me that Emerson, Lake and Palmer is easy listening, Lucky Man, but Sister Golden Hair is a rock song because of the drum beats. And I'm going, no.
That was the hardest thing for me. What you just said there, and I think for a lot of broadcasters too, of going, well, there's 2 schools of thought that people, on Lovesongs here, well, not here, I'm in Calgary, but in Vancouver, I'll still get people requesting Stairway to Heaven, which we can't play, so QMFM can't play that, because the audience thinks, well, that's a ballad, even though it's Led Zeppelin. So you get that thing sometimes where you can't play certain bands even if they're slow, because we don't represent that kind of thing, because that will lead also to your requesting anything else from Works Volume 1 or something from ELP, right? It's just a mishmash.
Yeah. But I mean, back then you were really corralled by the CRTC. It was really difficult. Really, hit, non-hit. Ugh, God Lordy, crazy.
How did you get that job at what did you do? Did they come to you? Did you come to them? How did you end up working with the Yerkses?
Hal had 2 sons who listened to the 9 to Midnight specials on CHED. FM was coming. They said, Dad, he's the only guy. He's got to be the first guy you hire to be on this radio station. Boom. So I go and meet them. It happens. Larry Musser was working with me at the time. And it was a lot of fun, but the challenges, like with the CRTC, were mind-boggling. It was just crazy. But anyway, it all worked out. By the time we got to K-lite, things were really good. Right? Yeah. Because K97 was album rock. They hated us because we were always sort of there. But, you can't be, because that's not the definition of your license. Oh, God, it was crazy.
This is just part 1 of my conversation with Len Thuesen. This is probably going to be a 3-4-parter. I haven't gotten to the other parts yet. Len, thank you so much for talking to me. More coming up next week. Make sure you comment on our videos, subscribe to our channel, and share our videos. I'm John Beaudin from Rock History Canada.